Hey, folks, a number of things are happening in the world. And of course, we'll get to a number of those issues that are going on in the world and all along those lines. And later on today, I will be actually participating in a Juneteenth celebration. That's right, I'll be giving some lectures about the history of Haiti, which is a part of the Black Wall Street, as a bus goes up and down a short route. And I'll be the one that'll be discussing some of the things that are happening in that space. Another friend of mine did a film on Kwanzaa called The Black Candle, and definitely I do know the importance of filmmaking in terms of telling our stories and all along those lines. So that is something that I am very much aware of, is the importance of filmmaking in terms of telling the story and getting the story out and all in that space. Let me tell you about a couple of things that are happening in the world, and I'm going to bring in my special guest who has done a film about Juneteenth, which is going on in celebrations around the country and all in that space. So it'll be interesting to have a conversation with Drew Holly and see what he is doing and how he got involved in this particular film and in the filmmaking lanes in general. So we are definitely looking forward to a conversation with Drew. But right now, we're going to tell you about a couple of other things that are going on in the world. Tornadoes are ripping through Texas and Florida. So far, they've killed at least 4 people, and 50 million are under severe storm threats as one Texas town digs out of a deadly tornado. So that is what is happening in that area. African leaders are starting a peace mission in Ukraine despite the Russian missile barrage. So there are some folks over there that are going from the African nation on a peace mission, and definitely that is something that is happening in the world as well. And in terms of what's happening in the U.S., we'll get to some of those stories. And then, like I said, I'll bring my guest on as well. We'll have a conversation with him and see some of the things that he is seeing and some of the things that he has gotten involved in and all in that kind of space. So definitely there's a lot of things that are going on. Attorney General Garland is to reveal his investigations into the Minneapolis police since George Floyd was murdered. So that is something that is going on in terms of the Department of Justice there to announce their results of the federal probe into the Minneapolis police. And like I said, I mentioned this yesterday, we know that DeSantis has declared his candidacy, and there's another candidate that is coming out of Florida as well, that being Mayor Suarez, who is out of Miami. So he has declared his candidacy on the Republican Party as well. And the Southern Baptist Convention has banned female pastors, ejecting several churches in the process. My guess is that those are churches that have female pastors and that were arguing against that ban and all in that space. So they are, the Southern Baptists have rejected Rick Warren for accepting a woman pastor. And that we might have some conversations about that as well. And also conversations about what goes on with police training centers, because activists are pushing for a referendum to put the cop city on the ballot in Atlanta. So that is something that is taking place in the sense of the conversations around legal rights and what the police are doing and all in that space. So there are a number of things that we are finding in the news, and I'm sure there will be other things that we might get to as well. And by the way, a cyber attack impacts on the U.S. federal government and NATO allies. So that is something that a number of people have been worried about. And apparently it has hit a U.S. national lab as well as a nuclear waste site. And definitely that is something that we are seeing as well. And we know we talk about attacks in other parts of Europe, like the Ukraine, but apparently an American tourist died following an attack near Germany's Neuschwanstein Castle. So that is something that was going on in Germany. And apparently, Mr. Trump got into a little bit of trouble because apparently he declared food for all at a Miami cafe, but then apparently he skipped without paying that particular bill. So there's been some teasing and some news stories about that as well. And China G, the leader of China, Xi Jinping, has met with Bill Gates, calling him an old friend, and he tells his old friend that he hopes that U.S.-China friendship will continue. So that is something that we are seeing as well, and hurricane forecasters are watching tropical wave moving toward America's from the continent of Africa. So we'll see if that's going to bring us some negative weather, possibly on the East Coast and all in that space. And I had also brought up this story yesterday, and we may get to this as well. But apparently, an artist brought a real human skull from a Harvard morgue manager, and that is something that has been in the news as the Harvard morgue manager has been accused of trafficking body parts. And definitely that is something that folks will be maybe talking about on this particular newscast as well. And we may get to some other things that are going on in the world and world of politics and all along those lines. I know I've got Nick Palveda with me as well as Lee Newton Rhodes. And of course, I do have that special guest as well because it is a holiday. I think the actual day is on this coming Monday, the 19th, but a number of people are doing celebrations all during the weekend and all in that space. I mentioned that there is one going on at the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham, North Carolina from the hours of 3 until 9. And then there is one tomorrow in Durham as well at the Golden Belt facilities. And that will be one that Spectacular Magazine will be putting on. And that is one that has been going on for a number of years now as folks continue to deal with that great holiday and all along those lines. And then I think there's one in Bragtown, and I know a friend of mine, actually Miss Coco McMillan, will be performing at one that is in the Raleigh area, if I remember correctly. But I'm going to bring in Drew Holly, and we're going to talk about the film that he has done and all in that space. It is very early in the morning where he's at, so I'm glad that he was able to join us and have this conversation and all along those lines because he is coming at us from Portland, Oregon, and all in that kind of way. So, Drew, I'm glad that you were able to join us. Your folks had been in touch with me, and we've been talking back and forth. And I did glad that you were able to come on. And I know that you are a filmmaker, and one of the films that you are working on is one about Juneteenth. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your filmmaking journey, when you got into filmmaking, and why you feel that this holiday, which a lot of people see as a celebration of the emancipation of the slaves, and in some ways even another version of Independence Day, but for the African American community, as being an important holiday and all in that space. So if you can just share a little bit about your filmmaking journey and the reason that you are excited about this film that you've got that'll be shown, I think, in a couple of places this coming week and all along those lines. So if you'll just share some of your story and all in that space.
Good morning, Mark. I'm happy to be here and join you all this morning. So my film is called Buffalo Soldiers Fighting on Two Fronts. It recounts our film Buffalo Soldiers Fighting on Two Fronts. Takes a hard look at historical complexities of race, class, power, and discrimination, and Western expansion as a part of the United States history. We're telling a story that is to be entertaining, but most importantly, educational. The film recounts many admirational functions of the Buffalo Soldier. We want to be careful to tell an actual, true Buffalo Soldier story by, talking about, and the best way to do that in honor of the Buffalo Soldiers as well as our Native American brothers and sisters to tell this true story that the regiment did participate in the subjugation of of Native American and minors, and fought Filipinos fight for their independence. Buffalo Soldiers were an all-Black regiment created by Congress in 1866 during the Reorganization Act. During this same act, they created these 4 Black regiments as well as the Native Scouts Regiment. So that's what Buffalo Soldiers is about. How I got upon this journey and telling this story is happened enough. It was Juneteenth, 2018. I was volunteering in Seattle at the Langston Hughes Juneteenth Festival, and they wanted to capture footage because Juneteenth wasn't well attended back in 2018. People had kind of forgotten about the holiday. While I was there capturing some footage, I brought my little girl, and after a while, I heard her say, "Ooh, horsies." And when I looked up, I seen this all-Black regiment straight out of the 19th century galloping up the hill on horseback. It was stunning to see. They were the Buffalo Soldiers Living History Group out of Seattle, Tacoma. Then my daughter said, "Who are they, Daddy?" and I was stumped. I couldn't remember who these gentlemen were depicting. After a while, it dawned on me. I think it was the Bob Marley song or something that that I finally connected the two. And I said, I think those are Buffalo Soldiers. And her next obvious question is, well, who are the Buffalo Soldiers? I had no answers for her, so I went home and did a little research and wanted to show her some clips on it. There wasn't a lot of, um, there was a few clips, but it wasn't a solid. Um Together story about the Buffalo Soldiers, just little bits and pieces here and there. Being her father and not wanting, her or other children to not know who these people were, I decided to make this documentary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you brought up a couple of questions. And one is filmmaking and the importance of filmmaking in telling stories, or the importance of the arts in telling stories. So I just wondered, at what point did you realize that this was part of your creative journey, was also going to be in that activism space? Because you said that part of what you did was you were filming the Juneteenth on that particular day because of trying to get that further coverage and all in that space. And it had fallen off in popularity in that area, and I've seen it fall off in popularity in other areas as well from time to time. But at what point did you realize the activism role of the creative arts?
I know storytelling is always a good way to get out messaging, right? And here at my company, Blackball Film, we want to specialize in marginalized voices, right, and telling untold stories of people who have done great things but haven't gotten the notoriety. One such instance is Charles Young, who we cover in the film. He's our first Black brigadier general. Retroactively, he received that honor in 2021, 100 years after his death. But he was an extraordinary, you know, extraordinary man. He, was a third Black graduate from West Point, and he, rose up and he done a lot of amazing things. And we don't talk about this person much. So definitely telling his story was one that we wanted to make sure the audience knew.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to bring up another father figure as well, and he is a dear friend of mine, and is involved in the gaming space. As a matter of fact, I think he may have one of his young ones with him, and all in that kind of way. But Jatovia McDuffie is in the gaming space and is definitely involved with the gaming industry and along those lines. So Jatovia is definitely got his young one with him and all in that space. So I know he oftentimes does, but how important has it been for you to share this knowledge from a generational standpoint? That's part of the reason that I brought on
Right,
Toby. I know that
exactly.
even with his gaming stuff, he does a lot of that generational connection. It seems like part of what you're doing is trying to make sure that your I think you said your daughter understands and has a connection to the history and their own history. So how important has that generational connection been? Drew?
Oh, you know, we see this film as, just kind of as a catalyst, right? We see it as a resource. Um, this isn't the first Buffalo Soldiers film, and I pray that it's not the last Buffalo Soldiers film. It's a way of us passing on the baton to the next generation. We used music and illustration to kind of engage that younger audience. Um, it's important for us to know our history, like the things that were happening in Liberia, right? If we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. Um, so for my daughter and for our youth to know this history is important to continue it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had alluded to it earlier, but at what point did you know that you wanted to be a filmmaker? Because I know that a lot of times people get into this field later in life. Sometimes folks are already shooting camcorder films when they're like 7 or 8 or something along those lines. So at what point did you know that you wanted to get into filmmaking, and what inspired you to get into filmmaking?
Very early on in life, I was able to kind of notice when actors when I was watching TV that those were actors opposed to like that being real life. A lot of people will watch TV and can get totally consumed in it and think it's real life, especially watching like true crimes reenactments. So, like, I've had friends like, man, he's lost a lot of weight. And I'm like, yo, that's an actor right there. What are you talking about? That's an actor. Like they're not really shooting like the live footage of robberies being taking place. That's acting. I remember in high school, I went to this boys' school and we were doing some sort of Christmas play, right? And each the dorms had to come up with their own play, and just right away, I was able to jump in and kind of start writing this play as well as directing this play. And I didn't even know what I was doing at the time, but it was a real natural, uh, it was something. It was very natural for me. It was just this is what we're doing, and able to push us towards the mission.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Where exactly will the film Buffalo Soldier be showing at, and what again is the exact title, and what date will it be released? If I remember correctly, it'll be released on Monday, but if I'm wrong, correct me and all in that space. But when will it be released, and why was that date chosen?
The name of the film is Buffalo Soldiers Fighting on Two Fronts. It had its broadcast premiere on PBS on Monday, June 12th, and it'll have its World Channel premiere on June 19th, on Juneteenth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Toby, did you have any questions? And definitely, we've also got Lee Newton Rhodes. There may be Nick Palveda, the founder of the network, joining us as well. And I know we've got Sasha Starr and Shaquille with us also. But Toby, did you have any immediate questions that you had for Drew?
Well, I think one of the big questions, because kind of similarly to what I'm trying to do in the community as well, what and tagging on to what Mark said in terms of when did you know about getting into the film market and into the film industry? What advice can you give to those within the community that want to not only document or tell stories that they see? Because, for example, how your film is being released, there's also the new film on Disney Plus that's also being released, which I'm really excited about as well. The Kazazi Moto Generation of Fire, which is 10 stories of coming out of Africa, which is supposed to be another great push. Which I think more representation, telling stories about our community helps us thrive and grow. So what advice would you give to anyone within the community trying to tell stories or trying to document things that they think could be a story or something, or lead them down the path that you're going?
Well, I would say you have to be committed to what you want to do, right? Nobody's going to believe in it at the beginning stages, right? It's something that you're going to have to build and kind of start have to build your support. And it ain't going to be an easy road, but it will definitely be rewarding and gratifying once you're able to complete it. After, fundraising isn't easy. Crafting the story isn't easy. Finding the right crew members that are part of your team isn't easy. But again, it's going to be so rewarding, right? I've since the film has been out and we've gotten to show it over 50 different screenings, across the country, and just the responses that we've received has been it's been humbling, right? There's been some very authentic emotions from people who have ancestors that are Buffalo Soldiers or are connected to the story and maybe heard a little bit about the story and now getting that full picture. Through this film, we wasn't able to, this is a vast history. We wasn't able to fit it all into an hour. So we used different characters to take us through these points in history. Moses Williams was our connective tissue to the West, right? And he was like a veteran of the Indian Wars and how the Buffalo Soldiers got their name. Charles Young took us through the turn of the century, and as we crossed the Pacific and tried to establish an empire in Cuba, Spain, Guam, so on, and the Philippines. Kathy Williams' story didn't necessarily fit that narrative, but there was one that we wanted to keep in the story because her story was so inspirational. Um, so, in conclusion, what I have to say is, don't give up on yourself. Pretty soon, everybody will see the value of what you're doing, but you got to be persistent through that hard time.
What way? I have also I have a few buddies that have started their own comic book and so on and so forth. What in for you? What ways have you found best to fundraise? Because as you pointed out, that's one of the biggest key components. What have you found best ways? Because I know, like I said, my buddies who started comic book, dealing around similar situations, telling stories, telling Black stories that way with narratives. They've found a little bit of success with Kickstarter, but what about yourself? What have you found as a good way for fundraising?
I think first and foremost, I had to build a thick skin, right? Because you're going to get 100 no's to every yes that you receive, right? And that's from grant writing. So you got to just get good on your grant writing. Build you a template that you're able to transfer to each different grants, and expect to hear no, right? And get all your no's out of the way so you can receive your yes. Fundraising in our community and to tell our stories isn't easy, right? Nobody's giving us money for these type of things, but I was fortunate enough that this project did have some name recognition. People have heard of the story, heard of the name Buffalo Soldiers, but didn't know the story behind it. So I think there was a lot of interest in that. Yeah, fundraising ain't easy. There's no secret that I know of to get funding, and it's just about building a thick skin again, and staying committed and getting all your no's out of the way so you can receive your yeses.
Hey, Drew, there's been some films that have been somewhat controversial that talked about our history and everything. I'm thinking about like the 1619 Project and a number of other ones as well. But I was just wondering how important, because we've even on this show talked about education, is it for us to get these various narratives into our school system, in your opinion? Because sometimes there is a notion that we do the celebrity version, whether it's American history or whether it's African American history, and we do like the core heroes, and maybe we don't get deep into the lesser known stories and all in that space. But I just wonder your take on that, and how important is it for these kind of things to be taught in our school system, or should they be taught more in the outside of the school system?
This film was made to be as a resource for educators. At the beginning of the film, we talk about Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, and and how we've been fed the narrative that Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders conquered San Juan Hill, which broke Cuba's resistance and won the war. But if we look deeper and expand that lens out, as we should with all history, right, as all that we're being fed, that we see the real story is that the Buffalo Soldiers conquered San Juan Hill. Teddy Roosevelt arrived well after the hill was already conquered. So it shows him and his Rough Riders as though, and that's what history has told us, and that's what our history teachers even tell us. But that's not true.
I know when when you tell these stories and go through the history and everything else, we tend to fall in love with particular individuals. On a lighter note, can you tell us an individual that you found, maybe could be one of the Buffalo Soldiers or anyone else that you've fallen, I guess in love with and love their story? Can you give us an anecdote about that individual?
I mentioned, the three characters that we mainly follow in the film, and that's Moses Williams, Kathy Williams, no relation, and Charles Young. Yeah, those were, definitely stories that I fell in love with, and knew those were the characters that would drive the narrative of the film. I think it's better if I could talk about who didn't make it in the cut, and I would think that was like we covered the Iron Riders, right, from who rode their bicycles from Missoula, Montana to St. Louis on these first generation experimental bikes with heavy packs, dirt roads, and animal paths, right? And they rode these bikes all the way to Missoula, Montana. Their story was one that that I wanted to cover, but didn't necessarily fit the narrative of the film and got left on the cutting room floor, as well as David Fagan, who was a part of the United States Army during the Filipino Wars, and he defected to the Filipino Army because he's seen the injustices, right, was the same that he was experiencing at home, and he defected to that army. I thought his story was very interesting, and I wish that we had more space and time to cover it more.
Makes a lot of sense. Lee, did you have any questions, or Shaquille and all in that space? We've been learning from Drew Holly about this film that he's got going on, but y'all have been listening, and I was seeing if y'all had any questions as well.
First, I want to welcome you to the podcast. It's a pleasure hearing you. Second of all, the Buffalo Soldiers that you're documenting, congratulations, very nice. I'm sure it's very worthwhile. Does it exist nowadays, or nowadays, since the Army has been integrated, there is no longer any Buffalo Soldier units?
No, right. All the Army's been integrated. I'm not sure if the cavalry units still exist. So yeah, no, there's no longer Buffalo Soldier units, but there are different Buffalo Soldier groups outside of the Army that's continue to keep the legacy alive across the country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I got to, and kind of on another lighter note, Drew, have you seen? Did you ever watch the movie "The Harder They Fall"? Where they took. So, I hope you can see where I'm going with this question, because they took all the historical figures, the historical Black figures in westerns, and they threw them all in one timeline.
Right.
Could you see that happening with what you're doing, taking the documentaries of all the Buffalo Soldiers and all the other individuals? Could you see a movie like that taking place and that taking off the same way The Harder They Fall did? And if so, where would you put those individuals? Because that was I love that movie for what they did and how they told the story of each one of the characters and gave them life. And that's where you could put those individuals that didn't make the cutting room floor
into a narrative feature film. I would love to. Right, the David Fagan story, for sure. I think it should be a narrative film, and that's something that I'm looking to work on. I loved The Harder They Fall, right, for what it was, and I think it was just shining light on their depiction wasn't of these characters wasn't necessarily 100% accurate. But I love that they shine light on these characters and these historical figures. Dive deeper into it.
I want to come back to something that Lee said earlier, because I do know that there are groups of folks that are in those kind of cowboy kind of organizations. As a matter of fact, I think there is one, and Jacoby can correct me if I'm wrong about the name, because one of them is the motorcycle group and the other is the horseman group. I think it's the Bull City Riders that is the horseman group and all in that space. But if I have the name wrong, hopefully Jacoby will correct me. But how vast are those kind of groups that are either supporting the Buffalo Soldiers or that are showing that a lot of African Americans are still into horseback riding as a hobby and an interest and all in that space? Because I know there's one in Durham. I think there's one in the area where you're at in Portland, and there are a number of people that are still doing these trail rides and all in that space. So could you talk a little bit about that, and if that plays a role in your film as well?
The Buffalo Soldiers Motorcycle Club of Seattle is who was our very first. They were our very first production. They were the first things that we filmed, but their story also didn't make it into the film because we wanted to divert from the more contemporary stories and make sure that we gave people this foundation of the Buffalo Soldiers and their historical timeline. So that was a story that didn't make it into the film that I very much I love. I can't imagine, or excuse me, I can't count all the different groups that are keeping the legacy alive. The Buffalo Soldiers Motorcycle Clubs, the different reenactment groups. And I feel like they're in just about every state.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. Now, one of the things that I know that has been interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on this, and Nick may have some questions for you in this as well, is that PBS can be a difficult
Yeah.
organization to crack and all along those lines and everything, but you have had success with PBS. So what was that like, having that kind of success? Because I know that part of the reason, and Nick can correct me that if I'm wrong, that the Pod TV network exists is because they were having relationships with PBS and other kind of media entities. And sometimes when they were doing Money Masters or other things in that fiscal space, they would be given basically the graveyard shift in terms of the time to be shown and all in that space. So versus tackling that, they decided to go the route that you are now part of as part of this show and everything. But I was just wondering, what was it like dealing with PBS? And Nick may have some thoughts on that, as well as he is the founder of Pod TV. And I hope I didn't speak out of school by mentioning our own ties to PBS in the past. But Nick, did I cover that correctly? That we got?
Yeah, you did. I mean, and that would be my question to Drew, because I had a very frustrating experience with PBS. They have like 308, and this is the reason I'm curious. Are you going to be on common carriage on all their networks? Or are you just going to be PBS in Portland? I mean, they were pretty disorganized group to work with. So I don't know how far your distribution is going. So you would know. So tell us about the distribution of PBS.
So we were fortunate enough to get on like 90%, 97% of their stations,
Okay.
right? Which is over, I don't know. I have no idea.
Over 300.
Over 300, right? Different stations, right? And the film is going to be showed, 2,500 times in this week time, and like, Guam, Hawaii, like everywhere. So that's really great, right? And even home here at OPB, where I got the Nielsen report for Monday night. It was close to like 22,000 plus people that viewed the program on Monday night, which I guess was really good for that time slot. PBS is a hard nut to crack.
Right.
They lucky, they have a new leadership that is trying to bring in more diverse voices. A lot of time and money was focused on Ken Burns projects, and now they're seeing the error of their ways and again and shepherding new voices. I had to be a part of the PBS ecosystem, and I was part of this for like a number of years while working on the project. And how I was doing that is different fellowships. First, I was a part of Firelight Media's fellowship under Stanley Nelson, the great filmmaker Stanley Nelson. Then I was a part of Black Public Media, their incubator, right? And then I was a part of Ken Burns' Better Angels fellowship. And then I did the Wilcox Fellowship. So I was already part of their ecosystem. So they had like knowledge. So once they had the open call, I applied for that. It took 2 years to hear back. I had forgotten all about the open call.
Yeah.
Finally we heard back that we were accepted. Chris Hastings of the World Channel, who was my executive producer, he was also my therapist, and as I traverse the choppy waters of dealing with PBS, but it turned out they were very supportive. They're promoting the film like crazy, and I'm super happy to be working with them on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, congratulations by cracking the nut at PBS, because
I could do it again.
Drew, I was working with IBM and the Federal Reserve, and I was going, trying to put financial shows on, and they were just telling us, well, we just want to buy Downton Abbey back then and just show Downton Abbey.
Right.
Their average contributor is a 69-year-old female, and the shows that we put on just weren't suitable for that.
Right.
So we created our own network several years ago. Now we're distributing into 122 countries. So this show is seen in 122 countries with 2.3 million views last year. And we've expanded quite rapidly thanks to Mark. He's also added radio. are also on Spotify Radio and iHeartRadio. That just recently happened. So our goal is distribution, be everywhere, not just through LinkedIn. People are listening to us through LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, Roku. We have 4 channels on Roku, on Roku right now that run. So we've just been pushing like crazy distribution, mainly because of the frustration. And I only spent 2 years. So God bless you. You spent more than 2 years. I guess I wasn't patient enough with PBS. I was so frustrated with them. I'm going like, how do you crack that nut? Is it possible? 380 channels, and you got to get 380 cats to all agree. So congratulations. And we look forward to watching your show on PBS.
No.
Nick, this is off topic a little bit. Is PBS still publicly funded?
Partially, yes. It's partially funded through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Gotcha.
So they do receive public funds. It is a not-for-profit. However, the president does make close to $1 million a year. Okay.
Maybe we shouldn't be funding it from the public nowadays, since there's so much going on with cable, internet.
I disagree with that. But getting back to a quick question, back to the film area, with we'll take the what Nate Parker did not do, or that we're going to talk about the film and not the other stuff. With The Birth of a Nation, could you see yourself doing a film similar to what Nate Parker did with Birth of a Nation?
Absolutely. Nate Parker is actually one of my inspirations. He's innovative filmmaker. Birth of a Nation was great, right? It was, and yeah, no, definitely. I can definitely see myself going down that path.
Hey, Drew, along those same lines, you mentioned a couple of them.
A very tough industry. I think Shaquille, who's from Australia, who's down under over there, he's actually funded some films. I don't even want to hear about that experience, because it's kind of, Drew, you're in a really tough area. So when it comes to getting funding and monetizing, what is the plans other than PBS, or do you have a plan?
I feel, I see Buffalo Soldiers Fighting on Two Front is kind of the foundation of my film career. I'm not trying to get rich off this project, right? It was a project that it was a mission that I was on, and sharing the history of the Buffalo Soldiers. My next projects, independent filmmaking is no joke, right? It's up at night worrying about if you're going to get this grant, or, and I applaud you for, going out on self-distribution, right? You don't that's what I was going to do with PBS, pick up the project. And I think it would have did just fine. So I applaud you for stepping out on your own. And I think eventually that you'll find your own way to be much better, right? Not always the easy way. It's a good way.
Yeah. Shaquille, did you have any thoughts? Because you did do that film and Hero and everything, which definitely dealt with some things around mental health and other aspects of things in that space. So you have worked with a filmmaker, ironically, also on the West Coast, because if I remember correctly, he is in the California area and all in that space. And he has definitely been on our network in the past. But maybe you want to share some of your experiences and why you decided to get involved in the filmmaking as a contributor and a finance person with the film industry. So maybe you want to share a little bit with Drew about your experiences as well.
Well, I know I actually spoke to Henning Morales the other day, so we'll try and get him back on the show at some point. Look, for me at that time, when I was growing up, I was always wanted to be an actor. I was a good actor. I went to acting schools and all that sort of stuff. But I just never pursued it as I got older and went into finance. And then, in my 30s, things come full circle. I end up in Beverly Hills, and, I was introduced to a few people. And one of my business partner's daughters was going to be in And Hero, which was a film about teenage suicide. We have the highest rates of that per capita in New Zealand, which is where a lot of my family live. I actually know some young kids that have done that to themselves, unfortunately. And I know quite a few that have attempted to do that. So I thought that was an important story. And so for me, I wanted to be involved, and, I funded that. But I had no expectation or desire to sort of make any money out of it. That was really a gift because it was a story that I thought needed to be told, and probably the same with a story like what Drew Holly is talking about. That would have been something that I would look at funding, just because it's a story that needs to be told, right? But when it comes to financing films to make a profit, this becomes a lot more complicated. The budgets can become really high. The monetizing of these things can become, quite complicated. You have to have distribution arrangements and all that sort of thing. I think it can be profitable, but it's very, very high risk. People like to think of movies like Saw, where the total budget was $3 million and they took a couple of $100 million at the box office. That's not reality. That's not what happens. What happens is, you're going to make 20 films, and 19 of them, you're going to be lucky if you make your money back, right? But then on that last one, you hopefully will make enough money to recoup everything that you've spent on the other 19. So, look, it's an interesting business. It's not one that I'm an expert in. But, I have got a group of investors that say, look, let's diversify our investments a little bit. Let's get our toes wet and get involved in that. I think one of the good things as well about the level I'm at when it comes to financing, film productions, because there's 3 that I'm doing at the moment, is that we're doing it in the indie space, right? So we don't have a big, $200 million studio budget. But what that means is that we can actually give the actors and the directors and everything a bigger profit share. Okay, so they stand a chance to make a bit more money if it's successful. But also, because it's a smaller budget, you can actually appeal to a certain group of people. So, like if you're really into horror movies and you've got a group of people that are really into horror movies, then you can become a horror movie studio, right? If you're really into history movies, you can create that. So those are the sorts of things. I mean, you look at YouTube and you see a lot of those people that have got, 3 million subscribers and, 5 million subscribers and things like that. I think it's very easy to get into that space where you've actually got, a group of people that are going to come and see your film. And they'll give you the feedback as well about what they want to see more of and what they don't like. So I think it's a good way. And someone like yourself, Drew, it's a good opportunity, I think, for a lot of those voices that have just been drowned out, stories that people, I had to Google Buffalo Soldiers when you were on earlier, just to kind of make sure that I knew what it was, because I had a very poor understanding of it. And let's be honest, Buffalo Soldiers, as soon as you say that, the only thing I'm going to think of is the song. I'm not American, so I sort of heard of it before, but I didn't really know the history there. Why hasn't a movie like that been made before? I mean, this should be something that's a major, studio production with, great actors. And, this should be in every cinema. I mean, it should be a really great film. So, I think that those sorts of stories get forgotten about. And it's not just about, a particular culture, but it's about all sorts of different things. Erin Brockovich, that was a great story, taking on the big companies and going in there on her own and winning. Those are the sorts of stories I think we need to tell. And in my personal view, we're seeing a lot of these action heroes and all that sort of stuff. There's always all these great actors that are just buffed out wearing these costumes, but we're not hearing a lot of actual stories anymore. And I think that the independent space is a great place to do that in. So.
I agree. Hollywood is, continuing to recycle some of the same material. So it's going to be the independent world that brings up the new ideas and showing the new point of views, because we don't have the restrictions of, the studios telling us how to work our project.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Hey, Drew.
I just got a quick question for Drew. The Tuskegee Airmen, you do anything with them in terms of documenting?
No, I'm not doing the Tuskegee.
That might be worthwhile also.
The next couple projects that I'm working on and we're well in development. One is a more limited series in the commercial space, but we're still in the early development portion of it. And when I mean early development, I've been working on it for a year, developing it. and it's the rise, fall, and durability of one of the world's most iconic websites, and that's Craigslist. We're talking with Craig to kind of get his story and why he decided to make this email list that blew up to be a part of our cultural zeitgeist, and kind of where the internet began, what Craigslist meant for certain communities, kind of, then it goes into that fourth episode, and we follow a Craigslist categories theme. Like the first one is best of Craigslist. No, excuse me. The first one is Misconnection, the name of the series. The next one is Rants and Rave, and it's and it follows the hero's journey. And then the third episode is called Flag, and it's kind of talking about the more nefarious things and kind of the bad reputation that Craigslist got. And then it's the best of Craigslist, like, right, how Craigslist is the foundation of our current online ecosystem, how we evolved from what Craigslist put in place and kind of where we are in this digital space today with the new AI technology. So that's the one that I'm really excited about. I'm also hoping to work with a Native American director to do like a part 2 of Buffalo Soldiers Fighting on Two Fronts, which would be the Indian Scouts Fighting on Two Fronts.
Just really quickly, because I didn't know about that other film and everything. What is one of the most surprising things you learned about Craig and Craigslist in this film that we can expect? If you can give a little bit of a teaser, because I'm sure that folks who are definitely remembering Craigslist, I know that I have placed things on Craigslist and other people have as well. So what is some of the more unusual things that you learned, if you can reveal maybe a twist that we might expect to see when that gets released?
I would say that who we use it. Who the fuck is Craig, right? Craig is this, and he considers himself nerd patient zero. He's the type of guy back in the day that wore taped together rim glasses. He's not as flamboyant as some of these, but he deserves his place in the pantheon of technology, technical geniuses, right? But he's a bird watcher, an avid bird watcher, very kind of socially awkward guy, and not what at all you would think of when you think of Craigslist, right? The complete opposite. I think he's just an amazing character. And kind of giving people kind of the background of this site that we used for so long. When we say rise and fall, but also durability, because it's still here, right? But there was a time where it had a really bad reputation. And we hope to, kind of give people that background of this.
So I have to ask you, when you interviewed Craig, what is his thoughts about those folks that are on the rapid rise that might be the opposite of him? So did he have any insights onto the Elon Musk and the Richard Bransons and the Bill Gates of the world? Because that's actually the ones that are getting the notoriety and are doing that whole space race, going up into space and everything, which I'm thinking he's not part of. So did he have any insight into some of those folks that might have surpassed him?
Our interview with Craig is in July, so we haven't gotten into all those details yet. But Craig is an extremely modest, like overly modest person. So he's not looking for his ego to be stroked in that type of way. We barely can get him to do the interviews, right? He can be a billionaire, but he chooses to give most of his money away, lives in an apartment with his wife in New York, and it's just this extremely modest guy. But he's big on cybersecurity. He's big on, journalistic freedoms, and he's a great person. And I'm excited for people to get to know the man behind this iconic website.
Cool. Definitely. Any other thoughts and everything in terms of folks' questions, Shaquille or Lee or Jatovi?
I mean, Craig, yeah. Because it is definitely an interesting, I guess, yeah, rise and fall of that site, because it definitely was one of the forefathers in a sense to how we buy and sell, how we communicate online,
And how we found community and connection.
I mean, in all honesty, when Craigslist was going, I mean, that filled that void from Facebook with the Facebook groups. That was when Facebook groups started after that and really kicked off a lot of stuff. If you look at what's going on with Facebook, Twitter, all the other Discord even. So yeah, that's got to be a really interesting interview. And being a modest person, I'm curious what pathways he's going to go down. Because in all honesty, looking at, some of the other big ones, because like Zuckerberg is not modest at all. He's out and about, out front. But if you take, and I hate to use his name because, truthfully, he is more of a modest person than people, kind of act him out to be. A person like a Bill Gates, for example, because in terms of his product and what he put out, he and his wife are very modest in terms of being in that public eye, because they've done a lot of work on the back end dealing with malaria and all the mosquito stuff. So I guess in terms of thinking about Craig in that same fashion, it would be cool to find out what pathway are they going to follow, living in that modest world, and what are they going to, trying to attach themselves to in terms of, trying to figure out world solutions.
I will say, stay tuned, right? To get
I'm already hooked. You can see that now. I'm ready.
I'm ready for it as well and everything. Hey, just really quickly, and then I'm going to bring in Sasha. He may have some thoughts about what's going on in Ukraine and all in that space, and maybe we'll get to some other world issues as well. But if you could interview somebody in general and everything, who would that person be that you would interview that is on your wish list? I'm thinking that you probably don't want to interview Putin, but maybe he is on your wish list. So who is on your wish list of folks that you would love to interview that is on your dream list of interviews?
Let's make it even harder. Let's do past or present. Right. They don't have to be alive right now, because I'm curious.
Jacoby, you're making it tough now.
Yeah, you are making it tough, Jacoby.
That's the fun part. and we won't just do one. Do a top 5 if that makes it easier.
I feel like this is my top 5.
Because if he's struggling to find one, he's going to find it easier to find 5. Sorry about how harsh the other panelists are on you, Drew.
Definitely James Baldwin, Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers. We're talking about that. Craig Newmark. But we're already in communications with him and are going to film him in July. I think I'm just going to name off some of my favorite people, Jay-Z.
Dream list. That's
right. Michael Jackson, I guess.
Any biblical figures?
Biblical. Here we go. Jesus, maybe.
That's a good one.
That's a very good one.
We're just coming up with a wish list.
The whole wish list and everything.
Actually, on a very funny note, to keep it lighthearted, I don't know if you. So one of my favorite films of all time was, and I'm sure Buffalo Soldier is going to drop right in there, so I got to plug that. But one of my favorite films of all time, and I had because I love comedy, History of the World Part 1, loved it. It was a Mel Brooks film. They did a lot. They basically poke fun a lot of historical figures and so on and so forth. And when you said Jesus has the biblical figure, well, in History of the World Part 2, which just recently hit Hulu, they actually did a satirical view of not only Jesus, but also those surrounding him and the whole Last Supper. So, Drew, please take time, since you said Jesus, to watch the History of the World Part 2. You'll get a kick
definitely check that out and everything. Hey, Sasha, just really quickly, hold on a second. I'm going to divert because we only got a few more minutes and everything. But what is going on? I know that I did mention that there are some African leaders that are heading toward Ukraine and trying to be part of the peace settlement there. And I know that there are probably other people that are trying to do peace as well. So I guess some of the African leaders are thinking that they can help solve that problem and everything. So that is one thing that I saw, and I did see several attacks that were going on as well. So if you can, I know we got the show coming up at the 11 o'clock hour, but if you can mention some of the things that you are aware of.
Drew, we actually have a show that follows this. It's actually broadcast out of Kyiv, Ukraine. And Sasha also heads up the show, and he's out of Canada. So we're one of the few networks that broadcast twice a week from Kyiv, Ukraine.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, indeed, the show starts in 5 minutes, and I will talk in details of what's going there right now. Now, about African delegation, it's quite amusing. I can't see how whatever they will propose, how they can guarantee that both sides, specifically Russia, will obey with this plan, whatever they're going to propose. They have authority to propose anything at all whatsoever. And I think it's just a propaganda, it's a show. And well, this minute and a half that I talk about it, it's maximum what I can be allowed to spend on it. Really.
No problem at all. Hey, Drew, just out of curiosity, how much do you follow what is going on around the world? I know a lot of what you've been doing has been historical, but how much do you follow the world events, and how much is that something that you are interested in making films about? Also, there are a number of world events, definitely what's going on in Ukraine, definitely some of the things that are taking place in Africa and a number of other places that could make quite interesting movies and all in that space. So how much do you follow world events, and do you see any of those in movies in your future?
Yeah, my producer happens to be from Canada, and now she's over in Australia right now. She's all over the place. She's a great producer, and I stand with Ukraine. I stand against the oppression of people. So I very much follow what's going on as much as I can across the world.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How did you manage to get a producer that was from Australia and Canada, and how global is your production company? Because definitely we've got Shaquille that originally has family and has spent a lot of time in Australia, and like I said, Sasha is in Canada. So how did you create this global network of people that are involved in this film production of yours?
Again, the Craigslist, the limited series is still in early development. So, and I think I was introduced to my producer through our attorney. We share an attorney, an entertainment attorney. I was getting ready for a pitch, and I needed support. So my attorney introduced me to Lana, and Lana helped me through the pitch, and we decided for her to stay on the project after the pitch. So, yeah, we're going worldwide next.
Who knows? Maybe Shaquille will find some ways to get involved in investment of some of your projects as well. Craigslist sounds like that could be an interesting film for Shaquille. So what do you think, Shaquille?
Well, sorry, I'm having internet issues, so I actually missed the last 5 minutes or so of conversation. So sorry. I'm sort of dropping in and out a lot. I don't know what's the hotel or something, so I'm not really sure what was said.
Shaquille,
I'm sure it sounds good.
One of the films that he's doing is about the gentleman that is behind Craigslist, that iconic internet source and everything. So that's one of his next projects after The Buffalo Soldier. So it would definitely be something in that technology lane that you sometimes dabble in as well. So that's where I was going with that question.
Well, I'm a technophobe, but I think it'd be a great project. So you can feel free to reach out to me, Drew, if you want to.
What's your
plan right there and everything? Well, I know that Sasha's got
to after the show.
Yeah, I know Sasha's got to bounce off and get ready to do the other show on Ukraine and all in that space. But as we're heading out, if you have any last thoughts that you would like to share, Drew, now is the time for you to do that. And I have definitely appreciated this conversation. I think a lot of filmmakers got some great insight, as well as just people in general. So any final things that you want to say? And by the way, I do appreciate that you got up literally at 6:30 in the morning, because it is very early there in Portland and everything for this interview. So I definitely appreciate you getting up at that hour and all in that space.
No, I'm up this early anyway, about to head out to the gym after this interview. Got to stay focused and stay trained. I think my last final thoughts is, the film talks about these brave patriots who we've forgotten about in history, and I want audience to take away that look into history stories that you've been told a little bit deeper, right? To see the true story behind this history. Not only with the Buffalo Soldiers, but with all history, as we've been presented early on in life, there's been an agenda. So I would implore people to look deeper in what they've learned.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And on that note, we're going to get on out of here. We'll be back next week with some more amazing guests. I know we've got one out of the religious space and some other spaces as well, but I definitely appreciate you being on, Drew. And as you go further into some of your other filmmaking journeys, I hope that you will make a return trip and maybe even share some of your learnings and some of the things that you get from both this experience as well as your interview with Craig, the founder of Craigslist, and all in that space. So you're always welcome to come back whenever you are available.
It was so great meeting you all, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Sounds good.